Otto Ville Kuusinen, The Iron Helmsman of the Finnish Communist Party, by Elli Parkkari. Otto Ville Kuusinen, the Iron Helmsman of the Finnish Communist Party. Too little has been said considering his work and great importance, not only for the Finnish but for the international working class movement, and yet we Finnish communists say so often and with great pride. Then who is Otto Ville Kuusinen? The older generation of the Finnish working class, and those who follow political life even a little, know his name and approximately the stages of his life. After all, before the Finnish Revolution, during it and after it, his name was practically on everyone's lips. His opponents spoke of him with fear and hatred, the most progressive and poorest part of the population with admiration and love. But these days, especially those who grew into youth or adulthood during the war, didn't have the opportunity to come to know him other than through the slanders of fascism, with the exception of those few who were lucky enough to perhaps get accurate information about Kuusinen from their relatives. Otto Ville Kuusinen is above all a child of the Finnish nation, despite his long exile. It was precisely his great love for the Finnish land and people which drove him to the path of struggle, to free his people from the forces oppressing them. This love for his country he has also taught to all those who came within his influence. He is the son of a tailor from the deep inland of Finland, born in Laukaa on 4th of October 1881, finished school in Jyväskylä, graduated as a Bachelor of Philosophy. However, this isn't the most important part of his life, albeit always said with biographical information. Most important is his work in the working class movement, first in the Finnish, then in the Finnish and internationally. This fact has caused him to become an admired, beloved and respected leader, not only for the Finnish, but for the international working class and the most progressive circles of all nations. Kuusinen joined the Finnish working class movement during the 1905 events as one of the so-called December Socialists. He worked as the editor of the socialist periodical all throughout its initial run of publication from 1906 to 1908. He also joined the editorial board of The Worker in 1906, where he worked until 1916, when he moved to work for the Social Democratic Party to prepare laws and reforms which the Social Democratic Parliamentary Group were planning to present to Parliament. He was elected to Parliament for the first time as early as 1908, and then again in every election until the outbreak of the class war in 1918. It is said about this time, quote, "He was feared and respected by his political enemies when the blood revenge of the white mob and their bloody agitators had not yet poisoned the best of our bourgeoisie. As a speaker and debater, he was the sharpest of the sharp, and for that reason was always the first in parliamentary battles. His pen was shining bright, and many writings in the socialist periodical and countless in The Worker originated from it." Unquote. During the revolution, he was the most central figure of Red Finland, though because of his modesty he perhaps wasn't as visible as others. A description written soon after those times says, quote, "His work, his organizational skill, his motivation and self-sacrifice were even in those times greater than anyone else's. In the Finnish People's Delegation he had the modest post of Education Minister, but it's doubtful that there was even one part of the People's Delegation whose work he didn't help." Footnote. The Finnish People's Delegation was the government of Red Finland. End of footnote. And thus he ended up involved from financial and bank policy all the way to the planning of purely military matters. Unquote. Otto Ville Kuusinen's obituary in the Social Democrat, 1920, due to his assumed assassination. These couple of quotations from descriptions of those times demonstrate what importance Otto Ville Kuusinen had for the Finnish workers' movement, already before the Finnish Revolution. Already in those days he was the best theoretician of the old Social Democratic Party. The most talented man that Finnish social democracy has been lucky enough to include within its ranks, as an honest estimation stated. But of course, these estimations don't give a full picture of the scope and importance of his work. After the defeat of the Finnish Revolution, Kuusinen was forced to move to the Soviet Union together with many comrades who actively participated in it. This marked the beginning of his broad and varied work for the international working class movement, though work on behalf of the Finnish workers was always closest to his heart. One of the first great tasks after crossing the border was a thorough analysis of the past, not lamenting the fact that they had risen to fight, but the fact that they hadn't known how to fight better. Now, important lessons had to be learned from the defeat, the reasons, mistakes, and results had to be analyzed. The next task was the founding of the Finnish Communist Party in Moscow in August 1918. But Kuusinen wasn't satisfied only with a thorough self-criticism and founding of the party, as well as leading its work from the other side of the border. He wanted to get to Finland, to the side of the struggle and danger, despite the fact that getting caught would have meant a certain death sentence. Footnote. Kuusinen wrote a very important pamphlet titled The Finnish Revolution, a Self-Criticism. End of footnote. He asked permission from the party to be allowed to work underground in Finland, and was given it. His activity in Finland soon bore results, and the Ochranas, in parentheses, secret police, began an unusually intense hunt after him. Footnote. Ochrana was the Tsar's secret police, but it was customary for Finnish communists to call the Finnish secret police the same thing. End of footnote. Once he was reported captured and to have been shot while trying to escape. The bourgeois circles and newspapers of Finland naturally celebrated, but the working population felt this as a painful attack against itself. However, Kuusinen continued his dangerous work, and right after the rumor about him being shot, addressed a sharply worded declaration to the Finnish bourgeoisie. Quote, "It is a falsehood that I have supposedly been arrested and shot. You must have shot the wrong man." Unquote. At the same time, he criticized the white terror perpetrated by the bourgeoisie, arguing that it is evidence of the fear and weakness of the bourgeoisie, and not of strength and courage, and demonstrated that the foundation of capitalism was shaking, the reasons for this, the mission of the communists and the entire working class, to be the ones moving progress forward. After working for a time in the harsh underground conditions, as a target of constant pursuit by the Ochrana, he traveled back to the Soviet Union to continue his work without tiring. Kuusinen took part in the founding of the Comintern. After all, the Finnish Communist Party was one of the founding parties of the Comintern. Already in the first Congress of the Comintern, gained a lot of international attention due to his sharp intellect and tremendous foresight. His noble revolutionary heart blazed in every word he spoke at the Congress and its bureaus, in which he actively participated, was the Comintern's own evaluation of Kuusinen from the time of this Congress. His importance is estimated to have been even greater at the Third Congress of the Comintern. His thesis on, quote, "the organizational structure of the communist parties," unquote, were presented and accepted at this Congress. He was also elected as one of the secretaries of the Comintern, and thus recognized as one of the first leaders of the revolutionary working class of the whole world. Kuusinen had to perform responsibilities of many different kinds for the Comintern. His services were needed everywhere, even in handling special affairs in the Far East, and everything he performed with the same alertness, foresight, and care. No task was too large or too small for him. He always took the time to investigate every issue. His importance in fighting for the correct political line against right and left oppositions also cannot be called small. He brilliantly exposed the schemes of Trotskyists as well as Zinovyevite, Kamenevite groups, and showed what embarking on their road would mean in the end, not only in the Soviet Union, but everywhere in the world. In the 7th Congress of the Comintern in 1935, he, together with Dimitrov, was one of the main presenters, and especially in his speech on the youth, he explained what importance and role the youth in particular had in the struggle against fascism and war, and in building the Popular Front. And these congresses were not the only ones where the work of Kuusinen was seen. The work of his hand could be felt in every congress, meeting, and perhaps even more in the otherwise unseen daily work. Otto Ville Kuusinen, the Iron Helmsman of the Finnish Communist Party, a beloved leader of the international working class, fighter in the ranks of the Communist Party, one soldier, like he sometimes has called himself, is still at the helm in his own humble way. Still just as keenly, and with the same love, he observes the struggle of the Finnish workers. Here we will tell a few of the statements he has said in private recently about our conditions. Quote, "I congratulate you all on the results of the elections. It seems your work has had success. But even this result is only the first step in your new great struggle. I won't try to talk about the tasks ahead, because I am too distant from the movement that has begun there to know its concrete requirements." Unquote. He once again shows how the party is always at the forefront for him, all important, how even its best leader is only a party worker at his own job, and how necessary it is to lift up and raise new young forces to the work, while the old also fulfill their duty with honor. About this he says, among other things, quote, "It is already time for you young ones to take our place, and besides, we elders don't plan to sit idly either, but will go and fight where the party orders us to." Unquote. And later he points out, quote, "As far as I've been able to observe your work, I have no doubt that your course till now has been the correct one. If in the future, too, you can avoid at least the bigger mistakes, the quality of your work will only improve." Unquote. These few short quotations from Kuusinen's words show with what warmth and interest he is still involved in our work, ready to give advice, ready to evaluate mistakes, and ready to join the work on the ground, right away when it is possible. An entire book could be written about Otto Ville Kuusinen, about his work in the Finnish and international working class movement, and even then not everything would be said. In an outline as short as this, even the most important parts of his life, so rich in experience, can't be described, but his life continues, and still just as bright, and the coming days and years certainly bring still new great tasks, the solving of which require exactly the sharp intellect, attentiveness, warm heart and humility of someone like Otto Ville Kuusinen, who the majority of the workers in all countries, not the least in Finland, have learned to rely on. A brief afterword by the reader. It must be said that although for decades Otto Ville Kuusinen was a leading figure of the old Finnish workers' movement and the Finnish communist movement, and although during those years he opposed various kinds of revisionist and opportunist tendencies, he still became a revisionist in his last years. During the so-called de-Stalinization period, he manifested clearly misguided and opportunist views. His views were not identical with Khrushchev's, but he was still tasked to serve as one of the early theoreticians of Khrushchevite revisionism. Mainly, he tried to develop the theory of the so-called state of the whole people, and tactics which in fact covertly advocated a rightist, reformist road to socialism. This is something that has to be taken into account when evaluating the career of Otto Ville Kuusinen.